Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing this fine Friday? I know I'm actually feeling pretty good after a kind of a big, I don't know what you want to call it, internal integration. Lots of stuff came up for review, and I posted a little bit about it. It's been a very watery, emotional time for little Miss Kaya. And I don't tend to be a super watery emotional person. I tend to be a little more aloof. I am very emotional in the sense that I'm very aware of my emotions. I'm probably more aware of my emotions and everybody's emotions than the average person. But I tend to, you know, feel them, feel through them and analyze them with a certain objectivity. And, I have this Aquarius moon and this Capricorn sun. And so I tend to remain a little, so I come across as cold, I think, to people a lot when I'm actually really feeling a lot. But these transits through Pisces really just like hit me so hard and rocked my world. And I found myself just like melting into all these emotional energies and just totally just losing myself to them, which was a good thing, although there was some karmic things involved. So it was a little bit tricky because there were some past karma coming up that was sort of trying to overtake my worldview, and some threads of self-sabotage and relational sabotage. And so I was just like barely keeping my head above water with all that kind of stuff. But I feel like I'm on the other side of it now. I feel really good. I feel like I'll talk about it a little bit in this video through the context of the ideas I'm sharing, but I feel like I integrated and transmuted some really deep-seated emotions that were actually stored in my body, and I could feel that happening. So that's really cool. I love that kind of process. I tend to be sort of a scientist when it comes to emotional, spiritual, psychological development. So anyway, that's not really totally what my video is about today. I don't know why I just went on a little rant telling you about that. I think I just kind of wanted to, share a little bit more authentically who I am and what I've been going through. But anyway, today I'm going to talk about the cycles of time, or the ways in which time is cyclical. And we've sort of the second coming of Christ, which was not intentional. The timing of that, it was not intentional at all. I just happened to be exploring these ideas and started just getting inspired by this idea of the Etheric Christ. So the idea of the Etheric Christ on earth as the second coming, and how that looks if we look at it in a less personified way, but more through sort of the cosmic energies and shifts that are happening. So not just the shifts that the sun's going through, but the earth, and sort of how we interconnect with that. And then I'll weave in a little bit about the eighth sphere and how that plays into that. And so anyway, let's just dive right in and get started. Of course, I have my little spiel written here so I don't completely go off on a tangent and end up talking for 2 hours about stuff I never even planned to talk about. Anyway, so the cycles of time and evolution for Earth and humans. So according to ancient Vedic scriptures, or the Puranas, time is cyclical and not linear. And in my own words, correlates to the rise and fall of human civilizations, along with the ascension and descension of human consciousness. So generally, humans evolve with the spheres. And if you'll remember, I have a video on how Earth and humans kind of evolve through the spheres, through different expressions or incarnations of Earth and the cosmos. So just as they evolve through different expressions and incarnations of their own forms. So, as Earth sort of changes form too, and I think humans change form as they evolve. So this trajectory often repeats as a kind of falling from oneness, or God consciousness, or the Brahman, right? Or oneness with the all, into intense divisiveness and separation, both within the individual and around us in society and culture. And then back into an ascension again. So it's a cyclical clock, right? That's actually based more on the lessons within each cycle and like the progression of human consciousness through that, and the progression of Earth's changes. So this evolution also seems to coincide in cycles within cycles to cataclysms of all sorts. These intense geomagnetic shifts and cataclysms that coincide with apocalyptic events for humanity are no accident, in my opinion, but are an intelligent expression of the Brahman through creation to facilitate its own evolution. So I'm starting to entertain this perspective that all these geomagnetic shifts and cosmic energies and everything are all part of this sort of ever evolving expression of creation. And then that goes through these different cycles. So are we in the dark ages or not? I feel like that's a question we're probably all asking ourselves a little bit. Like, when is this darkness going to peak? When is the evil in the world going to finally peak? And we get to, move towards something, a better world again, because it does seem like a lot of really evil stuff is coming to light. So according to traditional Vedic scholars, we are now in the first portion of the Kali Yuga, which is actually the darkest age of the 8-part descension, ascension cycle. So you have these 4, right? You have the golden age, which is the Satya Yuga. You move through the 4 ages, Kali Yuga being the darkest. Then you move back up through those 4 ages. So it ends up being 8 parts. So this is outlined in the ancient Vedic texts, and each one lasts about 400,000 years. However, according to Sri Yukteswar, which was a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, and according to some other yogis and sections of the yoga community, we're actually already in the ascending Dwapara Yuga, which is the right after the Kali Yuga, as you're working your way back towards the golden age, when things start to, when the shadow starts to get pushed out and we work our way back towards this oneness or this unity consciousness. The Dwapara Yuga is right after the Kali Yuga. So there's a lot of disagreement in the dialogue about this. And I can't say that I took like a huge deep dive into it. I might continue to try to, figure out where the real truth is. But it seems to me there's just a lot of disagreement about whether or not we're in the Kali or the Dwapara. And anyway, so you can decide for yourself, and maybe you have something to say about that. Use your own discernment. Go do your own research, look it up. In any case, there are sub-cycles within these greater cycles. So there's many golden ages and many dark ages, no matter which cycle you're in. And to me, it seems like we're in a pretty intense moment of culmination in which shadow is at its peak in many ways. However, I do see a lot of awakening occurring and the seeds for mass spiritual consciousness sprouting. And it's the purging forth of the shadow for cleansing that seems really dark. It often seems like you're in your darkest moment when it's actually just all that stuff's being pushed out to be healed. So I think that could be one part of the cycle we're in. There's actually a lot more good force for good on the earth right now. It's just that it's actually pushing that shadow out into our face, right into our faces. Like, whoa, okay, I didn't know all that crazy evil shit was going on in the world, but now I do. Great. So then you have the idea of the age of Aquarius, right? And again, there's like all this disagreement about whether or not we're in the age of Aquarius or not. According to some astrologers, we are. According to others, we aren't. From my perspective, I think the battle between good and evil in relation to technological advancement has a very Aquarian flair. So even if we were in like a mini Aquarian golden age within the Kali Yuga, or within wherever we are, or even if we're in this Aquarian age that's supposed to be a golden age in and of itself, I think the battle between good and evil over technological advancement is an expression of that. And, some of that's not going to be so golden. I think that freedom and liberation that Aquarius brings will rise up in the end. But I think there can be a lot of ugly between now and then in humanity finding its relationship to freedom, and and finding a balance in its relationship to technology, and getting all those lessons and initiations around technology and the evolution of consciousness. So I really see that as a theme. And I think I'm maybe seeing it a lot more intensely than some other people. And I think that partly has to do with, I should make a whole nother video about this, but I have such deep impressions of some kind of past life experience. And I'm an Aquarian South Node. So I have I'm just barely starting to feel them. But when I see this technological stuff, it's so crazy. I feel like I've been here before. Like all the time, I'll see stuff manifesting and seeds sprouting for this technologies, and it's like I've been a part of it in a really big way before. So I think for me, it's really prevalent when I look at the world and the stuff taking place in the world. So we are also currently experiencing immense geomagnetic shifts on Earth, as well as, according to some scientists, auspicious solar events that may lead to some pretty massive transformations on Earth. Apparently, the Earth's magnetic field has lost about 20% of its strength, which makes it vulnerable to radiation from space, including the sun's potentially increasing activity. Now, materially speaking, this sounds kind of scary, as our bodies can't handle so much of this kind of energy. But when we take into account the cycles of how Earth transforms from one cycle to another, when we take into account that the photons from the sun are actually an electromagnetically intelligent aspect of the evolution of our consciousness, then to me, this could be viewed as simply part of the process. So even if Earth went through a giant cataclysm that wiped out most of humanity, it would just be part of the transformative process of Earth. Or even if she went through such, the poles shifting and everything that's going on, it could just be part of it. So this is really interesting. I was listening to, again, a Rudolf Steiner lecture the other day, and he was talking about how solar flares, back when he was incarnated on Earth, are actually an intelligent phenomena sent out to Earth on purpose by Michael. And these flares in Michael work with the iron in Earth's core, as well as the iron in our own red blood cells, as an impulse toward freedom. Now, that's kind of in my own words. That's not a direct quote, so don't quote me on that. But that's the gist I got of what he was saying. And I just found that really interesting. And I guess if we remember that this is all a matter of frequency and vibration, and we, as well as the spheres, are moved by this underlying current. We're moved by all sorts of underlying currents, and the sun's energy is one of them. Then it makes sense that the sun's amplified energy through solar flares and CMEs would have a direct spiritual impact through the mineral makeup of our bodies, through our bodies in general, through our etheric bodies. There's a really cool channel called Suspicious Observers, and they kind of track the sun and the Earth's poles, and they have some documentaries out, and I think it's a really interesting perspective. I don't necessarily just completely 100% agree with everything they're saying or predicting. I'm not sure, but it's definitely an interesting way to explore kind of what's going on with the sun from a geophysicist kind of perspective. So with the sun, with its solar flares, CMEs, micronova events, etc., plays a critical role with Earth in the transformation of human consciousness, including, I believe, the acceleration of DNA activation. If one rises up to the task of allowing the energies to light up our own minds and integrate the full spectrum of our emotions and traumas. So I've been entertaining this concept that the Earth's electromagnetic field, that the organic electromagnetic field, can be seen as a type of etheric body, one in which we as humans are intertwined with. And I believe the Schumann resonance is an expression of this etheric body and is affected by both Earth's own electromagnetic discharges in the form of lightning and other things, I believe, but also plasma ejections from the sun, as well as collective human consciousness on Earth. So our own etheric body and our own sort of the energetics created by our minds and our collective mind, I think affects Earth's field as well. So we're in this direct relationship. Now, there are also elementals and even negative entities of all kinds that affect Earth's etheric field, including the man-made electromagnetic impulses. So when we talk about the eighth sphere, we are referring to how the entire gamut of man-made electromagnetic interference creates a false field, which interferes with human-earth etheric connection, which attempts to interfere with how human consciousness evolves through these etheric earth and even cosmic energies. So if you take a look at Alana Freeland's book, if you get a chance to take a look at it, Geoengineered Transhumanism, it's really interesting because I think the book starts with describing all the chemtrailing they've been doing and the heavy metals and the different minerals and things that they've been spraying into the atmosphere. Now, it's up for debate, like whether this is like intentionally transhumanist or whether this aspect is, they're trying to like block out the sun and things like that because they want to reverse climate change and manipulate the weather and things like that. They want to be able to do that. So there's a lot of different reasons for them spraying these different minerals and metals into the atmosphere. But the gist I got from the book was that a lot of this stuff is conductive. So it becomes this conductive field almost that's being sprayed, right? And then when it gets into our bodies, it's conductive there too. And so if you combine that with like everything else, like the nanotechnology, and there's so many different kinds of technologies, then you get this idea that our etheric field and Earth's etheric field are being manipulated, right? And our relationship is being manipulated just on that kind of electromagnetic level through the minerals, through the metals. So there's a lot more to the book than that, though, and it's so dense. But I wanted to touch on that aspect in this video because I think understanding how Earth's electromagnetic field can actually be manipulated through these nanoparticles and things is really important. So now I want to talk about DNA just for a second. And I don't claim to be an expert on any of this stuff or DNA, but I'm starting to get the sense that, of spiritual DNA. And so in another video, I expressed about my awakening experience. And the visions that came on. And then once you have an awakening experience, if you continue to cultivate that daily, you literally evolve. You start to form instruments, spiritual instruments, you know, whether that's clairvoyance or clairsentience or astral travel or psychic abilities or telepathic abilities or deep empathy or, you know, psychic empathy or whatever. These things come through this, in my experience, through the development of the spiritual experience, through the development of the soul. And so I think aside from like physical DNA, there's a way to look at DNA where it's like the expression of the strands actually correlates to the evolution of spiritual consciousness and the gifts and abilities that come through that, and might even translate into like evolving into a new form in the next world, right? Or iteration of Earth, if you believe that, that is capable of more than we're capable now, or evolves into a more subtle form. So I'm starting to kind of just entertain that correlation between DNA and like spiritual evolution, right? And the idea that now through Rupert Sheldrake's work, that the species on the planet, there's actually like a cosmic memory that exists in the fields on Earth, right? In the electromagnetic fields or in the energetic fields. And there's a conscious cosmic memory there that informs these species how to express. So it's not all a product of the physical DNA, right? It's a product of our relationship to the field as well. So I love that through Rupert Sheldrake's work. I don't claim to be an expert on that. I've barely tapped into that. But then bringing in this idea of epigenetics, right? That our DNA expresses not just through what we get from our parents and from our lineage, but through our environment. So through diet, through the air we breathe, through exercise, through even psychological trauma, like I think is part of that epigenetic discussion. And so I'm just taking that a step further, and I don't think I'm the only one in saying, hey, okay, if our DNA expression can be affected by psychological trauma or by diet or by the air we breathe, why can't it be affected by the field literally? And if that field is manipulated by electromagnetic, like man-made electromagnetic interference, I think there's a conversation to be had there. So I don't claim to be an expert on any of those subjects really, like on a scientific level, but when I look at it from a spiritual level, I feel like I can see and understand how that might be the case. So anyway, the shifts occurring at the moment in the Schumann resonance, as well as in Earth's poles, right? Because the poles are shifting too. Might have already shifted, I'm not sure. And her field and her etheric body, I believe, have to do with our transition or our ascension into a new iteration of Earth and humanity. Now, how much of this is natural and how much is affected by man-made interference, I'm really still not sure. Why don't you guys tell me what you think? But in any case, I trust the process and our ability to remain connected where necessary. So I talk about this transhumanist stuff. I talk about the manipulations of the field. I talk about where we're headed technologically and how that's going to be very difficult for a lot of people. But I have complete faith in my own ability to stay connected to source and stay connected to my organic nature and evolve on the trajectory that I know to be right. So I feel that for all of you too. I just talk about that stuff not to invoke fear or hopelessness. It's not hopeless at all, but to bring about some awareness so that we can navigate things consciously. And I just find it fascinating. You know, Aquarius South Node, Aquarius Moon. I just love this stuff. It's like, if I could live in a sci-fi movie, I probably would. We kind of are living in if you look close enough, we are kind of living in a sci-fi movie. Anyway, so let's talk about the Etheric Christ. So Steiner taught that the second coming of Christ was an etheric event on earth. And apparently it's already here. Christ consciousness as cosmic rays of God consciousness, Christ as the living, pulsing, archetypal infusions into Earth's etheric field. As I've talked about in other videos, these imprints, right, in the greater mind and the blueprints or pathways toward liberation and unity consciousness. I talked about how these awakening experiences and these initiations are already in the field. They're like neuronal pathways in the greater mind, and we can tap into that. And I think of Christ consciousness like that, like an archetypal infusion, but it's alive. So apparently this has entered the inner layers of Earth, and all manner of negative demons are fleeing. And this is one explanation for why we see so much evil making itself known in the world at the moment. As this evil rises up out of the shadows or gets squeezed out by these Christ consciousness impulses or these cosmic energies and cosmic rays. You could think of these as like the sun's cosmic energies, or even cosmic energies from the outer cosmos. So this is a quote. I'm going to read you a few quotes actually from this book. Oh, I meant to bring the book over here. The book is The Circle of 12 and the Legacy of Valentine Tomberg, and it's by Claudia McLaren Laneson. And it's in the vein of anthroposophy, and Valentine Tomberg came after Rudolf Steiner, and he didn't take over anthroposophy, but he continued a lot of that, the vein of like that work that Rudolf Steiner did. So I really like this book and her kind of interpretations of his work. So anyway, so let's see the quote. So the spheres of evil lie between the human soul in terrestrial realms and the mother in the heart of the earth. Christ has been entering into these spheres over the past century, and as he descends into the inner earth, he causes evil beings to flee from him, thus opening these realms to stream radiant forces of warmth into human souls. The descent of Christ and the corresponding awakening of the mother call us to comprehend the spiritual events that stand behind the massive uprising of evil that we have increasingly experienced since the onset of the second coming, close quote. So that's on page 113 of The Circle of 12. And so the Christ consciousness is penetrating into earth to actually reunite with the mother who resides at the center of the earth. And I've been listening and reading and learning about this. Steiner talked about this golden sun at the center of earth. And Valentine Tomberg talks about in this book, or the interpretations through Claudia here, talks about this as the divine mother. So there are negative entities and energies blocking the full expression of the divine through the divine feminine on earth. And Christ has come to purge out and cleanse earth's inner layers so that humanity is also reunited with the mother. So here's another quote. During Christ's physical incarnation, he prepared the aura of the earth for the event of his second coming. He did this by endowing this sphere with the life force contained in the memory of his perfect biography that was at his death eternally inscribed into the etheric record of time surrounding the earth. The ground prepared so long ago at his death upon the hill of Golgotha created the actual substance by which he now manifests to us in the earth's etheric realm. At the first turning of time, Christ gave humanity the seed impulse for developing the capacity to receive the higher I. This is expressed by St. Paul in the words, "Not I, but Christ in me." It is the task of the I, of the human personality, to receive the Christ I, which is the I of each individual's higher self. The higher I directs the manas, consciousness of the spirit self, to flow into the I, indwelling the consciousness soul. When the human being has thus prepared for this experience, it is this manas cognition through which Christ and his bride, Sophia, will guide humanity along the path of the morning star. This is the path that leads us towards the fulfillment of the second half of Earth's evolution, close quote. So that's page 121. If you want to go check out that whole chapter is so beautiful. Okay, so with this second coming of the etheric Christ and the reunion between God and Earth, Christ and Sophia, we also must face the Antichrist, or Ahriman. And Ahriman, I believe, actually comes from Persian mythology, which I have not studied a lot, but I have seen that that's actually the source from before Steiner. But Steiner talked about Ahriman a lot as the ruler of this eighth sphere. So again, here's a quote from this book. And this is actually not one of her quotes. This is a quote from Ray Kurzweil, which it looks like it's from The Future of Human Machine Intelligence, Reinventing Humanity. Looks like it's either from his website or it's a talk of some sort. This merger of man and machine, coupled with the sudden explosion in machine intelligence and rapid innovation in the fields of gene research, as well as nanotechnology, will result in a world where there is no distinction between the biological and the mechanical, or between physical and virtual reality. These technological revolutions will allow us to transcend our frail bodies with all their limitations. Illness as we know it will be eradicated. Through the use of nanotechnology, we will be able to manufacture almost any physical product upon demand. World hunger and poverty will be solved, and pollution will vanish. Human existence will undergo a quantum leap in evolution. We will be able to live as long as we choose. The coming into being of such a world is, in essence, the singularity, close quote. Now, here's another quote from her book about the Ahrimanic Maya. And that's the main reason I'm reading this quote, is because I love that description, because a lot of you probably already know what Maya is, but I'll just real quickly, it's through yoga or ancient Indian scriptures, the Maya is basically the illusory nature of our reality. So it's the fact that like our world is partly an illusion. It's called Maya. So Powell here, and I actually meant to look up what his first name is, because this is in the same book, Circle of 12, but she refers to this other author. And I didn't put the book here. I can put it in the description, but this comes from his book and his last name's Powell. Anyway, so he refers to this Ahrimanic Maya. So going even beyond virtual reality, there are new technologies assisting in the creation of Ahrimanic Maya, currently being developed at a breathtaking pace. In fact, for some, virtual reality is now quite passé, having been completely eclipsed by augmented reality, which is defined this way. Augmented reality combines real and virtual, is interactive and real time, and is registered in 3D. Clearly, Ahriman's plans for ensnaring humankind in what is described in Christ and the Maya calendar as the third temptation are proceeding with great rapidity. With the help of the media and modern technology, human beings are being drawn into an Ahrimanic Maya. This is a very serious problem, having an enormous impact upon humanity's spiritual evolution at the present time. It is preparing the way for the greatest deception ever perpetrated upon a largely unsuspecting public, at least, upon those who believe in the veil presented by the Ahrimanic Maya, close quote. So I believe we can think of the Antichrist also as an expression of the unconscious shadow of humanity. So it's the opposite of the I or the I am. It's the opposite of Christ consciousness. It is the unconscious collective shadow aspects directed outward. So we all have an unconscious shadow that we're coming up against, but when it is unconsciously directed outward and made manifest in the world, then that's where you start to see evil, right? Okay, so let's bring this back down to earth a little bit and talk about our etheric body. So these aspects, this Christ consciousness, and these cosmic energies and these geomagnetic shifts and all this stuff with earth and the sun and the cosmos and this Christ is also arising in the individual. And remember, we're not really separate from earth or the cosmos. So of course it would arise in us too. And especially in individuals who are open to receive it. And if you're uncomfortable with Christianity, like a lot of people are, you can identify this impulse without being Christian at all in the dogmatic sense. You can identify it as cosmic rays from the sun or the cosmos, like I said. And so I would encourage people to try and heal any trauma you have around fundamentalist religions at this time, because it might get in the way of you actually receiving the essence. And so there's a difference between like fundamentalist dogmatic Christianity and the essence of Christ. And I struggled for a very long time with Christianity and patriarchal religions. And I read the Old Testament and the New Testament at one point, and I remember the way they talked about women in the Old Testament just drove me insane, but I read it anyway. But it drove me insane. But I had to heal my relationship with Christianity because I didn't want that to get in the way with my connection to the essence of Christ in my own heart, in my own etheric. And what I really love about anthroposophy is that, or the way Valentine Tomberg or Rudolf Steiner talks about Christ, is that they bring the mother in. So the mother, like they talk about the mother in the center of the earth, and they talk about Sophia, and they talk about this marriage, the sacred union and reunion. And so I love that there's a balance there. And I really understand it through my own experience. So I would recommend trying to heal or let go of the dogmatic stuff, because it's really not, it's not what Christ is really about. So part of what I'm getting at here is that the cosmic shifts in the sun and earth are spiritual energies that can be embraced for the evolution of human consciousness. And they just happen to be coinciding with this reigniting of Christ consciousness and the resurrection of Sophia and the mother on earth. Okay, so I want to share with you a little bit about how these shifts have been showing up for me. And keep in mind that this is anecdotal. This is not indicative of like it should show up this way for everybody. This is my personal experience and how I've kind of looked at things like the Schumann resonance and the solar flares and things and gone, oh, okay, well, maybe this has something to do with it. So it's my own personal subjective experience of these geomagnetic, metaphysical, anthroposophical, mythological phenomenon. So basically, since the beginning of 2022, since the beginning of this year, I have had some of the most intense anxiety I have ever experienced. But this is not like the kind of anxiety that you could link to an emotion or a thought necessarily. It is just raw electrical energy in my body. And I've never felt it this directly before. And it could be a product of just my own evolution. Like I'm deepening into my own nervous system and body. And so I feel things more directly than I used to. And it does sometimes seem like it's related to a PTSD of some sort. Like I can trace back the physical pattern of it back to an old car accident I had, and even to like certain themes in childhood, maybe, or past life traumas. But oftentimes it's not connected at all to anything. It just switches on. And I'm just blindsided by like, wow, I'm in like this intense, it's like adrenaline coursing through me. And one of the other things that's happened with this is that I've become insanely insensitive to anything that's bad for me, and especially stimulants like sugar, processed carbs, alcohol, and coffee. I drank coffee for 10 years and I never had anxiety. I mean, if I drank too much coffee, maybe, but now I've had to quit drinking coffee. And then when I start up again, it immediately throws me into like an adrenaline rush that it paralyzes me, basically. Like it shuts me down. I can't handle the energy. So there are these factors like diet and stuff, but they seem so out of place. It's like, why all of a sudden am I? And so I've kind of come to attribute this to some of the other shifts going on, like the crazy spikes in the Schumann resonance, or the sun's CMEs and solar flares, and the weakening of the magnetic field of Earth makes it so that we feel that more. So to me, there's something going on that's really triggering some stuff to the surface. So when these rays or energies amp up, they light up one's etheric body, which in turn is going to highlight any areas that are stuck or stagnant. And this shows up in the emotional body and in the organs and physical body structures alike. So I think of the etheric body as kind of the densest energy body that connects our physical body to the rest of the subtle layers. I think everybody kind of has a different way of experiencing and different terminology around the different energy bodies. So it's not so much getting caught up in the descriptions. It's more trying to understand our own experience. And that's what I'm doing now, and communicating it to you so maybe you can understand your own experience better. So in my experience, the etheric body is attached and expressed through this emotional body. And the emotional body is this crystalline fluid-like structure that shows up in the fascial layer. So the fascia is this layer that wraps all of our muscles and organs. And this fascial layer stores cellular memories of trauma events, as well as emotional energies and etheric imprints, or even knots. So where that etheric body overlaps into the physical body, you have this fascial layer, right, which transmits emotional energy, and this connects the whole body together, because it's the connective tissue, it's the network of connective tissue that wraps up everything in your entire body, and it's all connected. So it's pretty fascinating to think about that and to try to feel into where that is in your body. And so these etheric imprints can show up as miasmas or miasms and karmic material. So you can have like a knot in your fascial layer, like in an organ structure, and it's actually attached into this etheric imprinting, which is some kind of karmic material. And these miasms are actually like generational, like your family's kind of collective karma. And I've had one of those. which I'll talk about in a minute, for the last few years that I've been dealing with. And I've just kind of like gotten to that layer where I've been able to dissolve it. So when we avoid negative emotion, it will drive the energy of that emotion deeper into the organs and strengthen the imprinting in the etheric body. Now, if you develop enough body awareness, subtle body awareness, interoception and inner felt sense, you'll be able to identify these miasmas and karmic patterns in these fascial etheric layers and actually move into your etheric body from there. Okay, so when we use food or alcohol or any other ingested substance to avoid negative emotion, we halt our spiritual development and energy begins to stagnate, not only in the body, but also the etheric body. So the symptoms arise related to the bad physical habit, but in many cases, not in all cases, the source of that symptom is often emotional and etheric. So we can see this pattern most commonly, from what I've found, in the liver, as this is the central organ for processing and filtering everything we ingest. So anything we ingest in order to avoid emotion damages the liver. And anytime we avoid emotion in general or ingest anything to avoid emotion, it just drives that energy deeper into the body and imprints it into the etheric. So the liver is actually a hub of consciousness in the body. And when it becomes clogged or is stagnating, it'll infect your entire life, especially on the levels of creative clarity and on momentum toward the actualization of one's soul's desire, right? So in both Chinese medicine and the Ayurvedic system within yoga, the body is approached through understanding the 5 elements and how they manifest as balanced or out of balance. And this corresponds to emotional states as well. In Chinese medicine, the hara is an important, actually the hara in Taoist, I'm not sure if it's Chinese medicine, that the hara, or if that's a Taoist philosophy thing, but anyway, it's an important entry center for the etheric body because there are a lot of meridian points that meet up there. So anyway, going back to my personal experience, the other night, I was just allowing myself to feel into this electrical energy in the body. And I noticed it was really localized around my sacrum. And it's just this like raw adrenaline. And so I was laying there before I fell asleep, and I just decided to just sink my awareness into this area and, just sinking it deeper and deeper and deeper. And I realized at a certain point that there was actually like a fragment of me or an aspect of me that was actually floating above my body, above my pelvis, about 3 feet. And it was attached by a cord through my, like my hara point or my belly. And, it wasn't like upsetting really. It was just like, oh, okay. Because the energy of this electrical energy, this raw energy, like it's really like a fear state, right? But it's not really I can't find that it's connected to much. I mean, here and there it is, but it's just this kind of like PTSD energy that's like stored in my nervous system. So what I realized is there's this part of me that was just like out of body. And I think it could have been maybe left over from my car accident, because when I had my car accident, it threw my whole pelvis off because I actually hit one leg, the airbag hit one leg, and the way my body shifted, my whole pelvis is now like really tilted. And I've been working with that in my yoga practice. I've been really trying to align that. And when that impact happened, when I hit the guy, he hit me head on. He pulled right out in front of me on the freeway. I went unconscious, like everything blacked out. And I ended up spinning and flying all the way to the other side of the road. And he flipped up over my car, like up over my car. His truck landed sideways behind my car. The whole top of my car was completely smashed in the back end. And so he like skimmed across the top of my car. He could have crushed me. And, but I was fine. Like I got to the other side of the road and just snapped back to, and I was totally fine. I barely had any injuries to speak of, but I have this distortion and twist in my pelvis from that accident. And I think that lately some of these energies have actually caused it to sort of pushing the energy to the surface for me to assimilate, and integrate. So I noticed this the other night, and it was just a really interesting experience. I know it sounds really trippy, but I go through a lot of trippy stuff. So I've also recently had some really clear and direct experiences of feeling this fascial layer that I was talking about in my own organs, particularly like this area here with my liver. And there's actually been a miasmic, I can trace it to this karmic pattern or miasm in the family. And I've been working with this for about 2 years, and I've actually gone through like a lot of superficial layers. And this time I was actually able to do what they describe in Taoism, which I was able to actually get into kind of that fascial layer where that knot was, where I think the etheric imprinting was happening. And I was able to actually like get in touch with the emotional energies and then channel them up to the heart and release them. So when I first started making the intention to do that, really the outer layer was just anxiety. And then I realized that I was like, well, let's look a little deeper. What's underneath this anxiety? And I realized that what was underneath the anxiety was actually rage. And then what I realized was that this knot was actually tied in through these emotional energies and through these karmic family patterns. And I was weaving it through this avoidance pattern with alcohol and food and stuff. And so once I realized that, and I started getting underneath that anxiety, and then I allowed myself to feel the rage, and then I got underneath the rage, and then I felt it start to melt. And dissolve and soften. And I was like, oh, that's when all that emotional upheaval came over the last couple of weeks. And it all just softened into this mess, grief and despair, and just really watery, feminine, emotional release. And holy moly, like this pain that I've had here is almost completely gone after this. So this is after years of working with this. I actually emotionally cleared it, among other things. I mean, it had to do with some dietary stuff too that I've slowly been shifting. Like I said, the avoidance stuff with food and alcohol and stuff. But I could directly feel that I could place my awareness here and go through the emotions that were being released from this fascial layer, and I could transmute them through the heart, through the universal love and unconditional compassion and acceptance, and it's clearing. So I thought that was really cool, and I really feel like that it's that kind of etheric emotional healing, that kind of like bringing in these cosmic energies and responding to how they move us to heal our traumas and heal our stored up emotional content, and be in direct relationship with those aspects of ourselves. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, like bringing this into a personal mode. I'm trying to describe that overall experience. So Anyway, that's the end of my video. I hope it wasn't too long. I love y'all. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.